Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Send Nutrition Podcast with your host Bryan and Peter today, and this is episode 82, and we're going to talk about horse muscle fiber types and how to influence them in your training and nutrition, especially from pony club to endurance to even the thoroughbred racehorse. How are you, Peter?
Bryan, I'm feeling a bit down actually. My ego has been severely bruised. There was a thread or a post somewhere on the Aussie Horse Nutrition, and we got called schmucks.
It's not one of those 1 in 1,000 non-Zen fans out there.
I want to know what I did wrong, and I haven't had a schmuck since year 12.
She could have called you something worse, I guess.
I agree. No,
it's a nice censored version, but yeah.
I'm just joking, Bryan. Sort of water off the duck's back. I'm not sure sort of what was there, but I think we came across it by accident. And I thought it was pretty funny, so I thought I'd mention it. And maybe to the listener who's listening, thanks for that. You made our day.
It's all good. You can continue to feed whatever you want to feed, but yeah, we'll just keep paving this Zen way. So let's get into this subject, Pete. And this is a really fascinating one in terms of healthy muscle function for horses. And we look at our horses and focus on lameness normally when you look at muscle, but normal muscle function is sometimes overlooked in a horse. And we're going to outline the ways that you can get even better performance out of your horse if you feed the muscle fibers in the right way, but also train them. And Peter will really elaborate on this.
Yeah, Bryan, this is pretty close to me. I'm obviously, we've been mucking around with horses for a little while now, and it's pretty fascinating. And look, some people might know, some people might not know, but a horse has actually got 3 muscle fibers, and this is for all horses in general. Obviously, the breakup of the fibers is different for each individual horse, whether it's an Arabian thoroughbred. But what I'll do is I'll go into each muscle fiber individually and just outline what function and purpose each one plays. So the 3 muscle fibers are type 1. You got then type 2A, and then you got type 2B. So they're your 3. I'll start with type 1. And what that basically is, the type 1 muscle fiber contracts relatively slowly and are known as slow twitch and are engaged pretty much at very low speed. So that's basically, as an example, the type of work for type 1 fiber would be just walking. Very, very easy, not strenuous exercise. The type 2A, these are probably the most important ones, and they're pretty fascinating. So the type 2A muscle fibers contract pretty quickly and are known as fast twitch fibers. The type 2A can generate energy aerobically and anaerobically. So that's very important, which basically means for speed work, this is the one that you want to train the most to get the best out of your horse. If you are obviously have got a horse that's doing a bit of speed work, and speed work, it could be from 20 kilometers an hour sort of to 40 kilometers an hour, but that 2A is pretty much the most versatile muscle fiber. And the third one is the type 2B. So these ones pretty much generate energy anaerobically, and that's basically without using any oxygen.
And let's just touch on the racehorses. What speed do they get up to? Around 60, I think, 60 k's an hour?
Yeah, at full gallop, Bryan, they're sort of from 60 even up to sort of 65 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, that's flying. So if we're looking at our muscle structure of a horse, it's made up of nearly over 45% of the weight of a horse, which is even more than the bone. So focusing on muscle health is really important for performance.
Yeah, Bryan, and further on to that, obviously, it's important to know how to feed that particular muscle fiber as well, and how to feed for that particular event as well. So let's just maybe say an endurance horse, they're going to need a lot more sort of fat and fiber in their diet to fuel that particular event, because obviously they're doing a lot more aerobic work, which obviously means using that type 2A muscle fiber, where you might have a thoroughbred, as you mentioned, at full gallop, for the last sort of 300, 400 meters, they'll be using majority of that type 2B muscle fiber, which is dipping into those glycogen stores that are obviously stored there through sugars and starches.
Yeah, they're using no oxygen to generate that power, and then that breakdown of glycogen actually build up that lactic acid, and that's where you find out whether the horse is fit or is it going to hit that wall in those last few 100 meters. And this is a natural adaptation for all mammals, so just going to their natural point of ability. But then when you look at how you can train these muscle fiber types, you can get them to access more oxygen, which is going to result in less lactic acid.
Bryan, I might take that one step back and explain the difference between aerobic energy and anaerobic energy. So, relatively speaking, to not complicate it, is the aerobic energy is basically a slow series of chemical reactions using oxygen, and anaerobic basically is a fast but inefficient method used in the absence of oxygen. So it's a real key to know exactly what to feed which muscle fiber. And what we'll do is we'll go into maybe a few different examples of particular horses and what is an efficient way and what is an inefficient way to feed those particular horses and those muscle fibers.
Yeah, nice crossover example I like to give to clients is when you're looking at swimming. So if we're going to swim just 50 meters, we just want all the power. And normally we just take one breath in that 50 meters or even no breath. So you see the Olympic athletes, they don't even come up for air. But then when you have like a 400 meter race, you're actually breathing after each stroke.
Yeah, that's very well summarized, Brian. We might start diving into the nutrition aspect of these muscle fibers as well. So I'll briefly outline the differences in feeding for a particular muscle fiber. So what it is basically, it's the importance of this relative to nutrition, which each fiber can use different energy sources, as we explained. So I'll start with the type 1 muscle fibers. These use fatty acids as the energy source by which the ATP is generated. So type 2A, Brian, use both fat and carbohydrates as well as fiber. And then you've got the type 2B, which utilize carbohydrates either through glucose or its stored form, which is glycogen.
Yeah, and here at Sen, what we're trying to do is even out this whole nutrient profile. And we do this day in, day out with our clients, particularly the high performance ones. And when you look at the typical diet that we come across, it's too overloaded in carbohydrates with lacking that fiber and also that good quality fatty acids.
That's well said, Brian. And you did mention fatty acids, so I might explain to our listeners what they are exactly. I'm sure our switched on users know exactly what it is, but maybe our new listeners that might not know. So fatty acids are the end product of fiber digestion, and free fatty acids are the end product of oil digestion. So what we're trying to do with that, we're trying to feed an efficient fuel for a particular muscle fiber. So basically, it's like a car that you're running on octane 98, and you're going to get the best mileage. You're going to get the most efficient power. Or if you're going to be running an ethanol blend 88, it's not going to be revving to where it needs to be. It's burning a lot more juice, hence is not as efficient. So I think this is the take-home message for this podcast, is the difference between the fatty acids and obviously the free fatty acids. And what you can do is you can delay the onset of lactic acid. You can use those glycogen stores for the very end of the event. Don't use it up too soon, because that's where the horse basically hits the wall. And then, obviously the lactic acid there, it starts getting a bit of pain. It can't push through. It's sort of like it's going backwards in a way. It's just not an efficient way to be feeding.
Yeah, and what we developed was Sen oil, which has many other benefits, as well as this calorie source that doesn't have sugar and starch. So there's no lactic acid byproduct when it's burnt for fuel. And the amounts you can give as little as 60 mils, you can give up to 200, 250 mils, and the horse in training will use this and actually help build more muscle fibers for this type of calorie source.
That's well summarized, Brian. So in effect, basically, the Sen oil can be used for the type 1 muscle fibers and also for the type 2A muscle fibers. So that's very important, obviously, as I said, to spar those glycogen stores. But the more that you give, obviously, the more it uses it for energy. And I think we've seen studies up to 500 mil in America sort of per day per horse, and a horse was absolutely fine. So it is a very safe way to feed. So if you did feed too much or sort of not enough, it's not going to cause any harm to the horse.
And what's equally important is when you do include these amounts is your training. So your training has to match that oxygen state, so that is burnt. Instead of getting into the glycogen stores with hard training, back it off and get into that aerobic training, because this is really complementary to a diet that is higher in fat and fiber. And then what you're trying to promote is more stamina in the horse at the end of the day.
Also, one note too, Brian, when adding an oil into the diet, it's recommended that the oil be added at least 6 weeks before the competition commences. And that's because, the psychological significance of this is that it allows the type 2A muscle fibers to adapt to its use and to generate ATP aerobically.
Yeah, and I think even another real world example to relate to this is like Usain Bolt, that amazing athlete over 100 meters. He is basically going anaerobic. So he wouldn't be relying on much fat and fiber in the diet. He wants that explosive power, that sprinting sort of profile. But what we're seeing in endurance horses and even in the thoroughbred industry in particular, we want to promote more stamina. So we're trying to get a more even nutrient profile with less grain that has been typically fed in the past. We still use grain for that portion of the race or the portion of those endurance events. But what is more important for a horse overall physiology wise is getting that fiber, fat and good quality protein levels. And here at Sen, we really have nailed that in our whole feed program.
Yeah, that's extremely well summarised, Bryan. I'll give the listeners an example. Maybe we'll use a dressage horse, we might use a thoroughbred, and then we'll use an endurance horse, to sort of show the extreme. So a dressage horse, we're mainly using the type 1 and then the type 2A, which basically means fat and fibre. So if you're competing dressage and your horse is going off its chops, you most likely have got a horse that's got too much grain in the diet. There might be pain as well, but that's a prime example of where, the speed of contraction is very slow, the power generated is slow, and that's where a fat and fiber diet would just be perfect for that horse, because obviously there's a lot of cantering, there's a lot of trotting, there's not too much galloping probably going on with dressage horses. So, if you tailor make your diet to be more fat heavy, more fiber heavy, those results are just going to be naturally better, because you're going to have a calmer horse, you're going to have a horse that's more clear, that's not building up lactic acid where it doesn't need to be, and it's just working with the genetics of a horse.
100%, Peter. There's so many benefits to including more fat and fiber in the diet, especially for the dressage horse, as you outlined. And temperament is a big thing, but you're also feeding those correct muscle fiber types, as we've just outlined.
And that's very important. Let's go onto the thoroughbred, Bryan. So thoroughbreds, obviously, they get a lot of grain, and in our opinion and research that we've done, we think they get too much grain. Hence, I think the high incidence of ulcers that are in this industry, which we're trying to change, obviously promoting more roughage, more fat, more fiber. And look, the thoroughbred has got up to 70-75% 2A muscle fibers, and what that means is that obviously it's it works aerobically and anaerobically, so you can still have a high fiber, high fat diet for thoroughbreds, as well as say have oats, obviously for the type 2 for the type 2B muscle fibers. And that diet, along with the Sen oil, say the grain-free oats and ample roughage, almost ad-lib roughage, that pretty much balances it out to make it a safe diet. But you do have the carbohydrates for the glycogen stores when you do need them in that last 300-400 meters of a race.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. Each component of the Sen diet can be adjusted in terms of that individual horse's needs. Is it more of a stayer? Is it more of a sprinter? And really, the horse will tell you at the end of the day in their performance. What we want to do is try and get the maximum ability out of them. And by feeding this way, you're matching their physiology. And then also that 2A muscle fiber type, which can be changed in training, will promote more stamina, which is just going to be a stronger horse at the end of the day.
That's well said, Bryan. I normally give a trick question to some of the trainers, especially the new ones that we start working with, and it's exactly what you said in terms of what percentage of a 1,200 meter thoroughbred race is actually using aerobic energy, and which is fat and fiber, and then obviously anaerobic energy, which is grains. So I've only had one trainer that's got it right, and it's around about 80%. So if you can imagine a sprinting race uses 80% 2A muscle fibers, which is fueled by fat and fiber, then why are trainers all over the world overloading their horses for 20% of the muscle fibers that are in a sprinting race?
It is a very good question to ask. And when you do see those sprinting races, often those really good horses even settle during that race, and you can see them drop their head and get into their action, and they're conserving that access to the glycogen or that anaerobic energy for right at the end, where they can explode and get the best performance that they can give. And when you have that even nutrient profile, it's simply by adding more good quality fat and fiber and protein, you're just going to give your horse the best possible chance in any performance setting.
Yeah, well said, Bryan. And moving on to the endurance horses, so these guys have got a lot more of the type 2A and the type 1 muscle fibers, and obviously a lot less of the type 2B. So if any of our listeners out there have got endurance horses or compete in I think it's 160 kilometer races, I think is one of the long ones they go to, your diet predominantly should be ad lib roughage, and obviously like a grassy hay, like a Rhodes grass or a cocksfoot or a teff or something like that. Very heavy on oil, like the sen oil, even up to 300, 400, 2 cups, would be absolutely safe. And then obviously, a lot of fiber, whether it's the grain free, in conjunction with the lupin pellet, and then obviously you can still have a little bit of oats, whether it's half a kilo or 750 grams, depending on the event that you're doing, depending on the training, and that there is pretty much is a balanced diet. Where if you're feeding a commercial feed just off the shelf, which might be grain based at 12% fiber and 20-25% sugar and starch, that's a very inefficient way to be feeding an endurance horse, which could be using up to 85-90% of its energy using aerobic energy, and the grain feed that you're feeding that's based for the overall diet is only fueling probably 10-15% of the muscle fibers for your event.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. You just want to get the best result for your horse, and there's a better nutrient profile. That's what we're trying to aim for with the Sen feed program.
Yeah, Brian, you're 100% right. It's very easy to get enough, of those glycogen stores for anaerobic work, because the anaerobic work is only towards the end of any event. It's not halfway through. It's not sort of at the beginning. It's more so towards the end. But we find that a lot of the feeds that are out there, most of them are grain based. So you're just feeding in a very inefficient way, which then obviously can result in irate behavior, can result in ulcers. Long term could be laminitis. And all this can be avoided just basically, making sure that you're feeding enough roughage, making sure that you're feeding enough roughage, obviously plenty of fiber, plenty of fat, and just leave those grains sort of at the bare minimum. And we can help you obviously balance that diet, which we do offer obviously through the website or even consults over the phone.
Yeah, at Sen, we have already done the hard work for you. So you can go through with a balanced diet from our profiles, which is going to help optimize those muscle fibers. So then you don't have to think about your nutrition. You can just get on with your training, spend more time with the management of the horse, and also maybe a few more drinks.
Brian, the take-home message I want our listeners to take from this podcast is that your job should be to spar basically the glucose and the glycogen for anaerobic use, and leave that till the very end. And what you can do is you can use the sen oil and obviously the fiber source, which is say the grain free, the lupin pellet, even hay, to delay as long as possible, the glycogen sort of sparring / stores till the very end. And it's very easy to do. And it all evolves around just having a balanced diet, which is right from the very beginning.
And there's another point we want to try and touch on with our horse owner listeners is the amino acids in the diet. So when we think of muscle, people go and reach for an amino acid supplement. But what we should be looking at is what is the most limiting amino acids in the diet, and that's lysine and also methionine. And with any properly balanced diet, you're going to get sufficient amount in all your feeds and supplements you already feed without grabbing an amino paste on top. So you might be saving yourself a bit of money having that whole base diet all balanced and having sufficient amounts of amino acids to start off with already.
Yeah, and further on to that, like many of our listeners, I'm sure, have reached out at some stage for a calming supplement, like a magnesium, and that could be possibly getting caused by a horse obviously getting too much sugar and starch, and it's obviously it's irate, it's fiery, it's not focusing, it's not concentrating. So, as you outlined, it's more about the nutrients and having a balanced diet, and further on to that point, once the nutrients are absorbed, pretty much it's the fueling, the muscle fibers that generate the movement. So contraction of the muscle fibers is fueled by a chemical called ATP, as I mentioned previously, and the rate of use of that ATP by the muscles depends on a rate of contraction of the muscle fibers. So muscle stores very limited amounts of ATP, and therefore, mechanisms in the horse exist to generate it as needed. And that's where we're drumming on about, feed the fiber, feed the oil. Type 2A are the most predominant muscle fibers in a lot of these horses. So you should be feeding majority of your diet for those type 2A and type 1 muscle fibers, and only a little bit of the diet for the type 2B, where we're finding it's the other way around. Like a lot of the grain-based diets, and 90-95% of feeds out there, they have got some sort of grain in them. And if you're that person that's feeding that feed, for for type 2A muscle fibers and for type 1 muscle fibers, that's not a very efficient way of feeding. And you might be causing your horse problems long term if it's done over a long enough period of time.
Even what we see is a grain-based foundation, but then also roughage that is also high in sugars and starches, like an oat and hay, a barley hay. It's just a double-edged sword in terms of not optimizing the physiology of the horse.
Yeah, and one point further onto that, I give the example of it's an example of like us eating McDonald's or KFC every day. When you feed a horse grain, obviously they're going to put on weight a lot quicker. It's going to be a lot harder to get them fit. So it's like us, eating unhealthy food and us going to the gym or us practicing, for a marathon or a triathlon. If we're going to eat, pretty crappy food, it's going to take us probably twice as long to get fit. We're building unneeded inflammation in our bodies as well, which obviously we got to cope through. So it makes so much more sense feeding for the physiology of the horse and obviously the event that you're competing in. And it doesn't matter what event you are, but majority of these horse events do use a lot more of the type 2A aerobic energy than the type 2B anaerobic energy.
So that nearly wraps this whole subject up, Pete. Like, we've only touched on the muscle fiber types. There's a lot of other aspects, including electrolyte balance and that hydration of a horse, but we've gone over that in other podcasts, and we just focused on what fuels these fiber types in this podcast.
Yeah, hopefully we haven't sort of thrown a cat amongst the pigeons, and hopefully some of our listeners are not listening to this on a Friday afternoon after a Chardonnay and just swallowed their glass after hearing the information about the muscle fiber types and the high grain diet. So it's just to bring awareness to the industry. And look, some people are doing it because someone told them maybe they didn't know that the horse has got 3 muscle fiber types and that each fiber type requires different nutrition. So we don't want to get too technical about it. But the take-home message is feed more fiber, feed more fat, feed less grain, and you're going to have a healthier horse.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And we're here for the horse at the end of the day. We want them in their strongest state, both physically and mentally, and this is the way to feed if you want that.
Yeah, that's well said, Brian. So if anyone is still confused, please reach out to us. Brian and I are available on the bat phone. You've got social media, email. Look, we're here Monday to Friday, so anytime, please reach out if you've got any questions.
Yeah, we're here to support all our horse clients, but not only that, if you don't even feed our products, just reach out if you need a question answered. We're gladly here to help people understand why they're feeding something, not just because someone else did.
Yeah, there's no hard sell here. And, even if you're not feeding our products, as Brian mentioned, if you've learned something from this podcast, it's going to be of benefit to your horse. Most of the time, it's going to be of benefit to your wallet as well.
Yeah, that's well said. All right, we'll see you guys again next week.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, cheers.